With just 9 games remaining for the Bulls in the regular season and the standings in the East sitting in a tight race between seeds 8 through 11, only 3 games separating those from the Hawks currently in 8th and the Pacers in 11th, it makes these upcoming games for the Bulls all the more critical as they close out their season in the hopes of making the playoffs after an otherwise underwhelming and disappointing season. And while I know some will say, why does it matter? The Bulls aren't going anywhere anyway. They should try and lose as many of these final games as possible to increase their odds to keep that top 4 pick. Well, at the end of the day, even if they lose all of their remaining games, the chances of them being able to land in the top 4 are still pretty low, meaning you would perpetuate this cycle and mentality of losing, all but to lose your draft pick anyway. And even though the Bulls would likely see a first round exit, even if they do make the playoffs, there is something to be said about making the postseason and competing well in that first round to boost the overall morale and confidence going into the offseason. So given this, in today's video, we're going to be talking about why it's so critical for the Bulls to finish with the 8th seed as it relates to the play-in tournament versus where they find themselves now. So what's going on, everyone? You are listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Now, here's a look at the Bulls' remaining games starting tonight in Portland before they take on the Lakers and the Clippers in LA. Then the Bulls come back home to face the Lakers again, which, by the way, I'll be in attendance at that game at the United Center. Hit me up if you guys want to say hello if you're going to be there as well. Then the Hornets, the Grizzlies, Hawks, Bucks, and Mavs on the road, and then finishing off the season at home against the Detroit Pistons. Now, normally I would say, well, let's try and predict how the Bulls will fare in these remaining games and estimate based on these projections where they will likely finish in the standings. But to be honest, there is no predicting with this team. There is no rhyme or reason for how they show up for some teams and they don't show up against others. Like, I could sit here and say the Bulls will beat the Blazers, Hornets, and Pistons because those teams are all struggling, or in this case, the Pistons and the Hornets are just all out tanking, but we already know the track record with the Bulls and this season playing poorly against some of the worst teams in the NBA, and then playing very well against some of the best. What I will say, though, is that outside of the Hornets and Pistons and potentially the Milwaukee Bucks, if they've already secured the number 1 seed and are looking to rest their best players in the final games of the season, all of these other teams are going to be looking to win and fighting for their own playoff positioning. The Blazers still have a chance that they can make the play-in, although it's starting to look more unlikely. The Lakers and Clippers both in that tight race between seeds 4 through 12 in the Western Conference, which currently only 3 games separate the Suns, who currently sit 4th, and the New Orleans Pelicans, who sit 12th at the time of this recording anyway, which is just insane. The Grizzlies, same thing. They're going to be looking to compete. The Hawks, they're definitely going to be looking to win, especially against the Bulls, who are right next to them in the standings. And then the Mavericks are also in the same boat as the rest of those teams in the Western Conference in the middle of that pact. So, in short, no idea how the Bulls are going to show up against all of these teams because they've been one of the most inconsistent teams all season. All we know is it's not going to be an easy remaining schedule, and the Bulls have to stay focused and not mess around, and closing out these games and finishing 8th is actually so much more important than people think, and it's for a few reasons. One, the obvious is the fact that finishing 8th gives you 2 chances at making it into the playoffs. So for those that aren't aware, the 7 and 8 seed play each other in the play-in tournament. The winner of that game becomes the 7th seed, and then the loser of that game plays the winner of the 9-10 matchup, and whoever wins that game becomes the 8th seed. So if you're 7 or 8, all you have to do is just win 1 game, and you're in. 9 or 10, you have to win twice, and if you lose, that's it, you're out. So that's the obvious reason for why the Bulls should be looking to land the 8th spot. But more importantly, if you're looking at the standings, I don't know about you guys, but I would much rather play the Heat or the Nets in the play-in, who are tied right now for 7th. More so the Nets because they're really starting to fall hard as they're still getting used to their new look lineup post KD and Kyrie Irving trades. And also the fact that the Bulls completely destroyed them the last time around they met in Chicago. And then if the Bulls win that game, taking out whoever the 7th seed is, which by the way, the Bulls also swept the Heat this season, but I still wouldn't take the Heat lightly regardless. But if they can win the 7-8 matchup, they now become the 7th seed and would likely face either the Sixers or the Celtics as opposed to the Milwaukee Bucks. I talked about this briefly with Adam Amin when I had him on earlier this week on the channel, but facing off against a team like the Celtics, who the Bulls have played well against this season, who have also struggled a bit closing out the season, unlike the Sixers and the Bucks, who have been absolutely red hot and on a mission. I'm not saying the Bulls would win this series by any means because it's still the Boston Celtics, and the Bulls just aren't constructed to be a team that could beat the Celtics in a 7-game series. But the Bulls match up well against Boston and could make it a competitive series. You're talking about a team that, while yes, they do have a superstar player in Jason Tatum, they don't have a guy like Joel Embiid and Giannis, who are going to dominate inside and are MVP level candidates, and two players the Bulls have historically struggled against. Now, if the Bulls finish with the 9th or 10th seed, you're looking at most likely going up against the Toronto Raptors, maybe the Atlanta Hawks depending on if they fall. But my guess is it would probably be the Raptors, who the Bulls do not match up well against. With the Raptors' size and scrappy defense, really the last couple of seasons the Raptors have been a problem for the Bulls, and it's because of the Bulls' inability to have a strong outside offensive game. And trying to work inside and slashing to the basket or operating in the post isn't going to be easy against a team like the Raptors when they have guys like Jakob Poeltl, Siakam, Anunoby, Barnes, Chris Boucher. They are a big and long team. And while the Bulls have done fairly well going small against other teams who also like to play small ball, this is not how the Raptors play on both ends of the floor. And if you lose that game, that's it. You're done. You're going home. You miss the playoffs and you send a lottery pick to the Orlando Magic with a small chance, less than a 20% chance that pick ends up in the top 4. Now, of course, you may end up having to face the Raptors in the event that they do finish 8th and they also lose that 7-8 matchup. It's likely going to be the Raptors that come out on top in the 9-10 matchup if it's over the Atlanta Hawks. I personally think the Raptors are a better team than the Hawks, but if the Hawks do win in a 9-10 matchup, I actually like the Bulls' chances against a team like Atlanta, who, while yes, very talented, are not a good defensive team, and historically speaking, not all the time, but the last couple of seasons anyway, the Bulls have done very well on Trae Young, who is their biggest offensive weapon. The question is, can the Bulls actually make it to the 8th seed, let alone making the play-in in general? First, the Bulls will make the play-in. I mean, that would be pretty bad if they missed it, considering they have good separation between them and the Wizards and Pacers, as long as they don't suddenly collapse and go on a big losing streak. I don't see them falling to 11th. As of right now, the Bulls are a half game back behind the Raptors for 9th and 1.5 games back behind the Atlanta Hawks for 8th. According to basketballreference.com, the Bulls actually have the easiest remaining schedule between those three teams. Not that that really means much of anything anyway for the Bulls, but that's followed by the Raptors and then the Atlanta Hawks. And to be honest, the Raptors probably have the easiest schedule because the strength of schedule algorithm obviously doesn't factor in teams resting players at the end of the season. And while the Raptors do face the Celtics twice, both times in Boston, and then also the Milwaukee Bucks in Toronto, it's also the last 3 games of their season, which is very possible those teams might be resting their starters depending on whether the seeding has already been solidified at that point. So I would actually argue the Bulls have the harder schedule because aside from those 3 games, the Raptors are facing some pretty easy opponents. The Hawks, though, yeah, their schedule is going to be tough. They've got the Grizzlies, Cavs, Nets, Mavs, Sixers, Celtics. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they fall out of the 8th spot. So yes, as unattainable as it might seem, there is a path for the Bulls to actually finish with the 8th seed and get an easier matchup going up against a team like the Nets compared to the Raptors. Again, all of it depends on how seriously the Bulls take the end of their season and playing with a sense of urgency to try to close out the season strong. But you guys let me know, where do you think the Bulls will finish out the year based on the remaining 9 games as well as the remaining schedule for some of the other teams as well that they're going to be going up against? Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.